Nityam Bhagavati Sevaya Bhagavate Uttam Shloke Bhaktir Bhavatir Naishtiki Om Agyantanarandasya Gyanandana Shalakaya Chakshurunmalitam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha Jaya Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadara Shivasadi Gaura Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Mukhat Mukham Karoti Vachanam Pangam Langyate Girim Yadkripatamaham Vande Shri Gurudina Taranam Parmanandam Madam. Hare Krishna. So, in the last discussion, this is the ongoing instructions given by Narad Muni to the Prachetas. So, in the first set of instruction, he was explaining the need to perform devotional service and the how to also, that essentially accepting the Lord as the cause of all causes, the source of everything, transcendental to material and spiritual, the Lord should be served. And now, resuming from verse 18, Narad Muni continues to expand on the theme of the fact that only through bhakti can the Lord be satisfied. So, reading from verse Canto 4, 31, verse 18. Tenakam atmanam ashesha dehinam kalam pradhanam purusham paresham swatejasadhvasta guna pravaham Atmaik bhavena bhajavadam madha. Prem Kishore Prabhu?
Yeah. Because the Supreme Lord is the cause of all causes, He is the supersoul of all individual living entities, and He exists as both the remote and immediate cause. Since He is aloof from the material emanations, He is free from their interactions and is Lord of material nature. You should therefore engage in His devotional service, thinking yourself qualitatively one with Him.
So in these 5 verses from 18 to 22, the focus of Narad Muni's instructions are that one should try and satisfy the Lord by bhakti, and bhakti is the only way to satisfy the Lord. So both these points are being made. So here he mentions, Prabhupada says that by Vedic calculations, there are 3 causes of creation: time, the ingredient, and the creator. And when they come together, they are known as Tritiatmaka, or the 3 causes. And everything comes from this. And each of these 3 are found in the Supreme Lord. So Prabhupada says that's why in Brahma Samhita, Krishna is called Sarvakaran Karanam. Vishwanath Chakravarti, he presents these 3 causes as Kala, Prakriti, and Purusha. Same as Srila Prabhupada mentions, that Kala is, of course, time. Prakriti is also Pradhan, or the material ingredients. And Purusha, Vishwanath Chakravarti says, is the Jiva, as the secondary creator. Then the Lord, so this Purusha obviously includes Brahma also. Brahma is the cause of the Visarga, the secondary creator, and the Jiva is the cause of the continuous creation, the one that happens after the Visarga. So time is the representation of the Lord, but both Prakriti and Jiva also exist on the Lord. Jiva is the Tathastha Shakti and Prakriti is the Bairangi Shakti. So one can make this statement that the Lord is the direct or the indirect cause of the material creation. Because under the influence of time, Pradhan changes and Pradhan comes from the Lord. So that's why in this verse, Narad Muni describes the Lord as Swatejasa Dhvashta Guna Pravaham. So Swatejasa means by his own potency, he is creating and dhvasta, he is destroying guna. So guna is the material modes, also the material creation. So the fact that he is creating and destroying the modes indicates that he is transcendental to the modes. Because if somebody was only creating it, then one may make this argument that yeah, he created it and then he was bound by his own creation. Like they say for the grahasthas, right? The grahasthas, they create by their own potency, they create their household, and then they get bound by it. The spider makes the web and then lives within the web itself. But the spider can also destroy the web at will. So that is the difference between the jiva and the Lord, that the jiva might manipulate the modes and create something, but at will he cannot destroy it, but the Lord can, which means that the Lord is never under the modes. So considering him as the cause of all causes and fully spiritual, Narad Muni says that you should worship him directly and not indirectly, right? Because he is the cause of all causes. So when you worship him, everyone and everything is automatically worshipped. Then he uses the phrase ek bhavena. Ek means singular and bhavena is emotion, means it also means consciousness and mind. So Narad Muni is recommending that by your mind, Atma, worship him with full concentration, with one pointed concentration. Vishwanath Chakravarti gives a slightly more nuanced interpretation, which says that you should worship the Lord with one particular bhav. Ek bhavena, he says, is one particular bhav. And then Vishwanath Chakravarti quotes Jiva Goswami, that Jiva Goswami says in this context that one should worship the Lord with the mood of dasya, unmixed with other bhav. Now, at this point, dasya is appropriate, does not mean that it is the eternal bhav, but at this point, when one is trying to establish a relationship with the Lord or re-establish, then the mood of dasya is recommended. And Srila Prabhupada also comments that the last line of the verse, that Atmika Bhava, then Bhaja Adhvam Adha, that Eka Bhavena, Srila Prabhupada interprets as accepting as qualitatively one. Right? Vishnu Chakravarti considers Ek Bhavena as one mood. And then he quotes Jiva Goswami, said that mood should be dasya. So don't jump into other moods, simply in the mood of servitorship, worship the Lord. Srila Prabhupada translates Ek Bhavena as considering yourself to be qualitatively the same as the Lord, which means that considering yourself to be the spirit soul and the Lord also to be fully spiritual. Worship the Lord. So different nuances of the same phrase. Prabhupada in the purport writes that according to the advice of Narad Muni, one should directly engage in devotional service. This will include all pious activity. Chaitanya Charitamrita states, Krishna Bhakti Kaile Sarva Karma Katahaya. That one who worships the Lord in devotional service, but not automatically performs all other activities, pious activities. In this verse, the word Swatejasa, Dvastaguna Pravaham are very significant. The Lord is never affected by the material qualities, although they emanate from his spiritual energy. Those who are fully conversant with this knowledge can utilize everything for the service of the Lord, because nothing in this material world is unconnected with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So Srila Prabhupada uses this phrase, and as is Prabhupada's mood, that he always connects it with the practical execution of devotional service. So the fact that both the material and the spiritual creation rests on the Lord and are connected to him, one should not reject anything. And so even the material energy can be used in the service of the Lord as long as that conception is clear. Like the whole Yukta Vairagya principle. Okay, verse 19. Daya sarvabhuteshu santustya yena kena va sarvendriyo pashantya cha tushyatya shujanardhana.
By showing mercy to all living entities, being satisfied somehow or other, and restricting the senses from sense enjoyment, one can very quickly satisfy the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Janardana.
So Narad Muni mentions three favorable qualities in executing devotional service. So he says, Sarvendriya Upshantiya. So Sarvendriya is all your senses, and Upshantiya means pacified or under control. So self-control or sense control. Then Santushtya Yena Kena. That satisfied with, Santushtya satisfied, Yena Kena means whatever comes, this or that, whatever comes on its own account. And Dayaya Sarva Bhuteshu. That by showing mercy to all living entities. Right? And there is a certain correlation that Prabhupada expands, that from self-control comes satisfaction. And one is satisfied with the self, one can show compassion to others. So Narad Muni refers to the Lord in this verse as Janardhana, as the Lord of all living entities, and he's indicating indirectly that the Lord is the Lord of all living entities. So if you show compassion to all living entities, the Lord will also be satisfied. Then this point will be explained further in the next verse. Prabhupada also notes that real compassion is preaching. Daya sarvetishu should be extended to all forms of living entities. So preach to other humans, preach to the plants, to the animals, and the devotee should understand that this is so pleasing to the Lord that the devotee will happily go through hell to give Krishna consciousness to other living entities. And then he quotes the verse from 6:17-28. Okay, next verse, 20. Apahata salakshena malatmanya aviratam medita bhavano pahuta nijajan vasha gatvam atmanoyan na sarati chidravad aksharaha satami.
Being completely cleansed of all material desires, the devotees are freed from all mental contamination. Thus, they can always think of the Lord constantly and address him very feelingly. The Supreme Personality of Godhead, knowing himself to be controlled by his devotees, does not leave them for a second, just as the sky overhead never becomes invisible.
So the previous verses described Abhiday, the method of bhakti. From this verse, prayojan is described. That what is the result of a person who executes bhakti, right? So transition verse, so it describes both the effect on the devotee and the effect on the Lord also. So two effects are seen on the devotee, that by the execution of devotional service, he becomes Atmani, which means he becomes pure of mind, and he becomes Apahata Sakala Eshana, that he becomes devoid of material desires, right? So previous verse talked about cultivating these qualities, that one should be santushtha, and one should be sarvindriya upashantya. Now, these qualities also develop as a result of bhakti. So one attempts to cultivate them, and as a result of that, one is able to execute bhakti, and then bhakti will further result in the development of these qualities. So these are the two things that happen for the devotees. Atmani and apahata sakleshana. They becomes pure of mind and devoid of material desires. What happens to the Lord? Two things happens to the Lord. That edita bhavana. Edita bhavana means that the Lord is now attracted by such a devotee. And the second thing is that he becomes their constant companion. And so one can say that as a Paramatma, the Lord is in any way the constant companion of the jiva. But the companionship of the Lord for the devotee is different. As the Paramatma, he is the neutral companion. But as Swayam Bhagwan, he is now the well-wisher. He is the friend, he is the protector. So he is the all-in-all companion of the jiva. Prabhupada writes a wonderful purport in which he develops this path of perfection. He takes the previous two verses, this verse and the previous verse, and from that he develops that what is the path to perfection. So I have summarized it as points, and they correlate back to the purport of Prabhupada. So the first point is that as long as one is under the control of the material modes, one is full of desires for sense enjoyment. Then by Shanvatam Swakatha Krishna, by always thinking of Krishna, the heart of the devotee is freed of all kinds of desires. Then as the mind is cleansed, one does not have any material hankering, and one attains the perfectional stage of mystic yoga, which is samadhi. Now, this is not the Astang mystic yoga, but samadhi is being able to think of the Lord constantly. Whether it's in meditation or in service, the result is the same. So we see that 2 and 3 are basically the prerequisites which are being nourished by the process of Shanvatam Swakatha Krishna. Right? So by this process, one becomes freed of material desires, and when one is freed of material desires, one is able to do more Shanvatam Swakatha Krishna, and in this case, Smarana. So what happens next? Now, the devotee sees the Lord within his heart. Dhyana vista tadgatena manasa pashyanti yam yogina. So now the Lord has become the companion of the devotee. The Lord was always the companion, but now the devotee is able to see the Lord as his companion. So as soon as the Lord appears in the heart of the devotee, he also gives the devotee protection. Protection from what? From the contaminating modes of material nature. And the result of this protection is that now the devotee can constantly meditate on the Lord. So in this way, he becomes completely dependent upon the lotus feet of the Lord. Right. So these first 6 points are the progress of the devotee. From a stage of being full of material desires because of being under the control of the mirths, to executing Shravana Kirtan Smaran, becoming progressively cleansed. As a result of that progressive cleansing, being able to perceive the Lord within the heart, understanding the Lord is the constant companion, and the Lord's reciprocation is giving protection to the devotee from the modes. What else does happen for the Lord? The Lord is now attracted by the constant meditation and the dependence of the devotee, and he reciprocates. Now, how does he reciprocate? This is where the Guhyam aspect of the Lord comes. Because under normal conditions, if a person is dependent on another person and the other person becomes favorable, then the person extends by giving protection. And so the child is dependent on the mother recognizes the dependence of the child, and the mother reciprocates by giving protection to the child. The citizens are dependent on the king acknowledges it and reciprocates by giving protection to the citizen. So the Lord does that. But in addition to that, the Lord also becomes dependent on the devotee. This is the Guhyam part that Narmani is revealing, that he becomes controlled by the devotee. Prabhupada says that in this way, the personality of Godhead becomes dependent on his devotee. The Lord is invincible, yet he is conquered by his pure devotee. He enjoys being dependent on his devotee, just as Krishna enjoyed being dependent on the mercy of Mother Yashoda. Thinking himself dependent on the devotee, the Supreme Lord experiences great enjoyment. So this verse is a glorification of Shuddha Bhakti, because only in that mode is this dependence of the Lord on the devotee appears. Not in any other mode. In any other mode, the Lord will extend protection. That happens. But only when one is executing pure devotional service, only when one is experiencing complete dependence on the Lord, then the Lord also reciprocates by himself experiencing dependence on the devotee. And so there is what is known as Aishwarya Sheetal Prema. Aishwarya Sheetal Prema is love that has been made mellow. Mellow in the sense weak. Sheetal means actually cold, but love that has become mellow because of Aishwarya Bhav. But when that Aishwarya Bhav goes, the Sheetal also goes, and the Prema becomes complete. It's a very nice verse. In the Kartik Mass, we chant the Damodar Ashtakam, and the third verse, Iti Diksvalila Virananta Kunde Swaghosham Nimajantam Akshapayantam, right? Where it is said that Satyavrata Muni says that the Lord is boldly declaring that he is naturally conquered only by his loving devotees. Swaghosham Nimajantam Akshapayantam, right? He's not keeping it as a secret. Generally, when people have a dependence on something, they try to keep it as a secret. But through the Damodar pastime, where we see that he's dependent on his mother for milk, he's dependent on his mother for approval, he's scared of his mother. So that dependence of the Lord, that pastime is a bold declaration of the Lord. Specifically, he says to those who are only aware of the opulence and the majesty of the Lord, to them he is saying that I am naturally conquered by the love of the devotees. So we see that example mostly in Vraja, right? So We see once when this is when the Uthan ceremony of Krishna was done. Krishna was few months old, maybe 3 months old, 4 months old, and at that time he was beginning to get up. So it's called the Uthan ceremony. And then Mother Yashoda arranged for yajna, and the Brahmanas were coming and chanting all kinds of mantras. And how did Krishna respond? He went off to sleep. And that's when the Shaktashur pastime is done. Then, seeing that Krishna is sleeping, Yashodamai put him under a cart, and then he kicked the cart, and the cart demon was killed. Similarly, we see in the Brahma Vimohan Leela, when Lord Brahma comes and he is reciting this wonderful prayers to Krishna, and Krishna is quietly waiting for him to finish the prayer so that he can resume playing with the gopas. Right? So all this wonderful, deep prayers from Brahma, they don't attract his mind as much as the fighting and the playing with the gopas. Okay, moving on to verse 21. Na bhajati kumani shinam saijyam hari radhantma dano priyarasogya shrutadhan kula karmanam maderi vidadati papam akinchanneshu satshu.
The Supreme Personality of Godhead becomes very dear to those devotees who have no material possessions but are fully happy in possessing the devotional service of the Lord. Indeed, the Lord relishes the devotional activities of such devotees. Those who are puffed up with material education, wealth, aristocracy, and fruitive activity are very proud of possessing material things, and they often deride the devotees. Even if such people offer the Lord worship, the Lord never accepts them.
So can anyone remember, there is another famous prayer that also glorifies the Lord as being the Lord of those who have no material possessions.
Queen Kunti's prayer, Akinchana Gochara, something like that she said, right?
Akinchan Gochara, very good. Yes, there Kunti Devi, she glorifies Krishna as Akinchan Gochara. That those who are Akinchan, who have no material, they have the shelter of Krishna. And in this verse, Narad Muni, he is contrasting the relationship of the Lord with his devotees and non-devotees. Right? So the previous verse noted that the Lord is controlled by his devotees. Right? And the first part of this verse reiterates that point. But then what the verse also states that those who are not his devotees can never achieve him. And the qualities of the devotees and the non-devotees are given to indicate who can get shelter of the Lord or control the Lord and who cannot. So what are the quality of the devotee? Akinchana Gochar. Right? So their only wealth is the Lord, which means they have no material wealth. And they're fully satisfied in the service of the Lord. Now we contrast this with the non-devotees. They are puffed up because of their wealth and they deride the devotees. So for the devotees, the Lord relishes the devotional activities. Now for the non-devotees, even if they perform activities that appear to be devotional, Narad Muni clearly says that the Lord never accepts their worship. This is because their worship is a reflection of their materialistic ego. And the second thing is that they are contaminated by the offenses to the devotees. So because of these reasons, even though they may be performing externally worship, But because they are offending the devotees, and because their worship is also materialistic. It may be for material gains, it may be for fame, it may be to attract the worship of others, but ultimately because of their offenses to devotees. So Prabhupada in the purport, he strongly speaks against Vaishnava Aparadha, that one who offends devotees can never be recognized by the Lord. So he says that if a person derides a pure devotee, he is never recognized by the personality of Godhead. In other words, the Supreme Lord never excuses one who offends a pure devotee. And he gives the example of Amrish Maharaj and Durvasha Rishi. So he says those on the path of liberation should be very careful not to offend a pure devotee. Now, offending a pure devotee is an absolute no-no, but one should not read this statement as saying that if a person is not a pure devotee, it is okay to offend the person. For one thing, you never know who is a devotee, who is a pure devotee, who is a mixed devotee. So this is like playing with fire. And the second is that it's not just that the Lord is possessive about his pure devotees, he is also possessive about the mixed devotees. So just like he will not excuse offenses to a pure devotee, he will not excuse the offenses even to a mixed devotee. But obviously the degree of the offense is a lot more. If you were to offend a peer as opposed to offending your spiritual master, there's a difference between the two. Even though the offense may be the same, but there's a difference between the two because of the fact that a more advanced devotee has taken more shelter of the Lord. And because they've taken more shelter of the Lord has also taken more control and reacts more so to offenses to such devotees. Okay, verse 22. Shriyam anucharitam tadarthanascha dvipadapatin vibudam sayatsva purnaha na bhajati nija bhrityavargatantraha katham mamum udvisarje puman kritagya.
Although the Supreme Personality of Godhead is self-sufficient, he becomes dependent on his devotees. He does not care for the goddess of fortune, nor for the kings and demigods who are after the favors of the goddess of fortune. Where is that person who is actually grateful and will not worship the personality of Godhead?
Okay. So this statement made in this verse, he does not care for the goddess of fortune, nor for the kings and demigods who are after the favors of the goddess of fortune. This statement appears almost exactly in another pastime in the Bhagavatam, a very famous pastime in the Bhagavatam. Anybody would want to take a guess?
It is not in the Kapila when Kapila Muni was talking to Devahati.
In the instructions of Kapila, probably. I actually don't remember, but it actually appears in the pastime of the cursing of the four Kumars. If you remember that when the cursing by the four Kumars, when the four Kumars go to Vaikuntha and they curse Jai Vijay, then at that point the Lord comes and amongst other things, he makes almost exactly the statement that so this is in the third canto, 16th chapter, where then he says that I do not care for the goddess of fortune. And Lakshmi Devi is standing right next to him at that time. And there we had this discussion, then how can the Lord make such a statement that Lakshmi Devi is a pure devotee and an eternal consort of the Lord, and he's making a statement, I don't really care for her in contrast to my devotees, right? And then the discussion we had was that it's in that aspect of Lakshmi Devi where she is granting materialistic opulence that the Lord is indifferent to. But Lakshmi Devi is also a pure devotee. She also grants bhakti. And in that mode, nobody is dear. There are so many statements that talk about the strong affection the Lord has, that he keeps her so close to him that she appears as a golden line on his chest. Right. So that is Lakshmi Devi as the most advanced pure devotee of the Lord. But when statements like these are made, that he does not care about the goddess of fortune or the kings or demigods who are after the favors of the goddess of fortune. So what are the kings and demigods looking for? Material opulence. That aspect of Lakshmi Devi is the Lord is indifferent. So Vishwanath Chakravarti Pad says that just as the devotees have possessiveness for the Lord and no one else, the Lord has possessiveness for the devotees. So this verse describes the dependence of the Lord on his devotees. And the only cause of the dependence of the Lord on his devotees is the exclusive dependence of the devotees on the Lord. So to make this point, Narad Muni speaks about mixed devotees who have dependence on the Lord, but it is not exclusive. Previous verse was speaking about non-devotees, and they are completely excluded. They're offending devotees or they're completely materialistic. But now this verse is talking about those who have mixed dependence. So they go to the Lord, but they go for wealth, like that aspect of Lakshmi Devi. So it indicates that they have dependence on the Lord, but they also have dependence on wealth. Otherwise, why would they ask for wealth? So for these also, the Lord does not give them that control. He does not become dependent on that because he demands exclusive dependence and he reciprocates by dependence. Non-dependence or mixed dependence does not result in that reciprocation. So Narad Muni asks this question, that knowing this to be the nature of the Lord, where is the person who is grateful and will not worship the Lord? So what does this statement mean? That if the devotee understands this nature of the Lord to become dependent on his devotees, will automatically become filled with love for the Lord. So the Aishwarya of the Lord has already been established, that he is the cause of all causes, beyond the modes, the greatest of the great. That has already been established. Now the devotee sees that my Lord is so sweet that even though he has all this prowess, that he controls everything, he is the source of everything, but yet he becomes dependent on his devotees. So Narad Muni says that when a person realizes this nature of the Lord, then why will he not worship him spontaneously? So the impetus to worship here is not to get control on the Lord. It's not that I think if I do this kind of worship, I can control the Lord and then I can get the Lord to do this. But it is seeing the sweetness of the Lord. Seeing how Krishna is running with fear from mother Yashoda. Seeing how Krishna is becoming the charioteer of Arjuna. So when one sees that sweetness of the Lord, Narad Muni says that who is the devotee who by nature is grateful and will not become filled with love of the Lord and worship him spontaneously? So Prabhupada in the purport makes this point that the dependence of the Lord on his devotee is real and not for show. And sometimes people say that when the Lord is doing all these pastimes, then is he just play acting? Does he actually become scared of Mother Yashoda, or he's just pretending to be scared? So Prabhupada actually quotes Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur here saying that both the Supreme Lord and his devotees are rasagya, full of transcendental humor. The mutual attachment between the Lord and his devotee is never to be considered material. It always exists as a transcendental fact. And then he says there are 8 types of transcendental ecstasies: bhav, anubhav, sthai bhav, which are discussed in Nectar of Devotion. Those who are unaware of the position of the living entity and the Supreme Person Krishna think that the mutual attachment between the Lord and his devotee is a creation of the material energy. Actually, such attachment is natural both for the Supreme Lord and for the devotee, and it cannot be accepted as material. So Prabhupada is making this point that sometimes when these statements are made, that the Lord becomes dependent on the devotee, one may consider this to be denigrating the Lord. That how can the Lord become dependent on the devotee? Is fully independent. Or it may cast suspicion on the devotee that the devotee is doing that to get dependence from the Lord. So Prabhupada makes the point that this is not material dependence. The nature of spiritual relationship is that this mutual dependence is the impetus for rasa, for bliss. That when the Lord shows dependence on the devotee, he experiences ecstatic bliss. And similarly for the devotee. And this bliss is completely spiritual. So it's an esoteric topic. Prabhupada covered, it's just mentioned here, noted for completeness. Prabhupada does not, and of course, this is not the place to do the full deeper analysis on it. But the reference that is made essentially is to the deeper mellows that happen when the spiritual relationship grows. So this is actually the end of the instructions by Narad Muni. He started the instructions from verse 9, ends them in verse 22, over 14 verses. And as I mentioned earlier, his instructions fall into 3 categories. In verses 9 to 14, he talks about Abhidaya. 9 to 12, he talks about Janma Karma Ayush, that every activity, ability, birth is perfected only when used for the service of the Lord. Then in verse 13, he says the Lord is the ultimate source of all realization. In verse 14, he illustrates that with the 2 analogies, watering the root of the tree and feeding the stomach. So essentially, he is giving the process of bhakti. Then he answers why should the Lord be worshipped. So from verse 15 to 18 is Sambandha Gyan. He gives several analogies to establish the supremacy of the Lord. And for this reason, only the Lord and no one else should be worshipped. Then from 19 to 22 is Prayojan, what is the result of this? So 19 to 20 talks about the qualities of the devotees that make them attractive to the Lord. Exclusive dependence on the Lord is specially glorified. And in verses 21 to 22, the interaction between the devotee and the Lord is described. Just as the devotee becomes dependent on the Lord voluntarily becomes dependent on the devotee. So this will now take us to the last part of the chapter, which is the conclusion, which is fairly quick, not much, like I said, not many purpose, but I'll pause here and see if there are any comments or discussion. Okay, if not, then we will conclude. So we will do the concluding part of the chapter, verse 23. Maitre uvacha iti prachetaso rajan anyascha bhagavat katah shravayitva brahmalokam yayu swayam bhuvo munihi.
Yeah. The great sage Maitreya continued, My dear King Vidura, Sri Narada Muni, the son of Lord Brahma, thus described all these relationships with the Supreme Personality of Godhead to the Prachetas. Afterward, he returned to Brahmaloka.
So Prabhupada in the purport says that one has to hear about the personality of Godhead from a pure devotee. The Prachetas got this opportunity from the great sage Narad, who told them of the activities of the Supreme Personality of Godhead and his devotees. So here we also get a sense of why it is mentioned that the association with the devotees is actually superior to the association with the Lord himself. Because the Prachetas, they received association from Lord Vishnu also. And it was transcendently motivating, captivating to them. But when they talk to Lord Shiva and when they talk to Lord Narad, then because the devotees are really able to glorify the Lord. So Lord Vishnu didn't come and glorify himself. But the devotees are able to glorify the Lord. And the devotees are able to talk about the glories of other devotees also. So we see that all these relationships with the personality of Godhead are described. The Supreme Lord himself described it, Lord Shiva described it, and Narad Muni described it. And after that, Narad Muni returns to Brahmaloka. Verse 24. Te pitan mukha niryatam yaso lokamalapaham hare nishamya tatpadam dhyantas gatim yayu.
Hearing from Narada's mouth the glories of the Lord, which vanish all the ill fortune of the world, the Prachetas also became attached to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Meditating on his lotus feet, they advanced to the ultimate destination.
Prabhupada says that here it is seen that by hearing the glories of the Lord from a realized devotee, the Prachetas easily attain strong attachment to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Then meditating on the lotus feet of the Supreme Lord at the end of their lives, they advance to the ultimate goal, Vishnu Loka. It is sure and certain that anyone who hears the glories of the Lord and thinks of his lotus feet will reach the supreme destination. So Prabhupada, the Falstuti comes later on. Prabhupada is already giving the Falstuti. That this is not just the conversation between Prachetas and Narad Muni, but these are all the conversations that happen between the pure devotees of the Lord. They have this potency of giving strong attachment to the Lord and helping the person reach the ultimate goal. Prabhupada quotes Bhagavad Gita man manabhav madbhakto. Okay, verse 25. Etate bihitam kshata yanmam tvam pariprashtavan prachetasam naradasya samvadam harikirtanam.
My dear Vidura, I have told you everything you wanted to know about the conversation between Narada and Prachetas, the conversation describing the glories of the Lord. I have related this as far as possible.
So, the conversation between Maitreya and Vidur, it began in the 3rd canto, 5th chapter. And now it ends in the 4th canto, 31 chapters. So it spans 60 chapters. And it spans 2,716 verses. And if you just look at the pages, it is over 3,222 pages. So a fairly elaborate conversation, but yet we see Maitreya is saying that I have related this as far as possible. So the point that is made over here, that even this conversation that is equivalent, it is equivalent to so Bhagavad Gita has 700 verses. So this is equivalent to 4 Bhagavad Gitas. So one may say it's elaborate. But even then, Maitreya is saying that I have only given you a little bit of knowledge. So Maitreya spoke about, he began in the 3rd canto, he spoke about Brahma's creation, Visarga. Then he spoke about Swayambhu Manu. Then we hear about the descendants of the 3 daughters of Manu, like Devahuti, Prasuti, and Akuti, in the 2nd half of the 3rd canto and the 1st half of the 4th canto, the first 7 chapters. We see the descendants of the 3 daughters of Manu, and specifically about Sati. Then from the 8th chapter of the 4th canto, we hear about the descendants of Uttanpad, beginning with Dhruv Maharaj. And that discussion of the descendants of Uttanpad continues from 4.8 to 4.31. Right? So from Dhruva to Prithu Maharaj, from Prithu Maharaj to Prachetas and the personalities that have come in between. So there is still one branch of the descent that is remaining. So Narad Muni or Maitreya, he started speaking about Uttanpad, even though Priyavrata was the elder brother. And the Acharyas explained, because Priyavrata, he had not taken to Grahastha life. He was renounced from the beginning, he had left everything, and he was meditating in the forest. So Uttanpad was the first ruler. And so Maitreya Muni, he first speaks about Uttanpad and his descendants. Now, Vidur is not going to wait to hear about the descendants of Priyavrata. In fact, after this conversation, we will see he will go to Hastinapur to meet with Dhritarashtra. So where the 13th chapter of the 1st canto begins, from where the 4th canto, 31 chapter ends. So the Acharyas, so why did Vidur leave without inquiring about Priyavrata? Because he was inquiring about everything else. Who are the descendants, sons, daughters? So the Acharyas say that by hearing the Krishna Katha from Maitreya Muni, Vidur gets very much inspired, specifically by the powerful preaching that comes forth in Maitreya's discourse. So Maitreya talks about Narad Muni preaching to the Prachetas. He speaks about Narad Muni preaching to King Prachinabarisha, to Dhruva, to Uttanpad. He sees the preaching of Prithu Maharaj to the citizens. Specifically, the preaching of Narad Muni to Prachinabarisha. That's the most elaborate preaching. It extends over 5 chapters. That stirs the heart of Vidur deeply. Because if you remember in that First Narad Muni, so Prachina Bari is completely Karma Kand, absorbed in material pastimes, material endeavors. So first Narad Muni preaches to him through the allegory of Puranjan. And what does Prachin Bari say? I don't really understand. Then he preaches to him by the allegory of the deer. Prachin Bari says that I still don't understand. Then Narad Muni says directly to him that you are Puranjan, you are that deer, you are that ignorant fool. Leave everything and go. And Prachin Bari says that in due course of time. And Narad Muni says, no, now, leave everything now and go. Now, do we have a parallel to this in Vidura's preaching? Where do we see this in Vidura's preaching?
With Dhritarashtra.
With Dhritarashtra, thank you.
Dhritarashtra.
So this is the mood that Vidur absorbs, and he also becomes enthused that if somebody can, like Prachina Bari, who's completely absorbed in material endeavors, can be redeemed, then perhaps my brother can also be redeemed. And then we know that when he went to meet with Dhritarashtra, his preaching is a lot more direct. He calls Dhritarashtra that you're a dog and you're living on the remnants given to you by Bhima. That you're old and then your eyes have gone and then your voice has gone, but still you're clinging. Very, very harsh, direct preaching. So the Acharyas say that this was one of the inspirations that Vidur got from hearing Maitreya Muni. So he does not even wait to hear about what happened with Priyavarta, but he directly goes from here to Hastinapur. Okay, moving on to verse 26. Sri Sukhavacha Yesha Utan Pado Manvasyanuvarnitaha Vamsapriya Vratasyapi Mibodhanirpasattamma.
Shukdev Goswami continued, O best of kings, King Parikshit, I have now finished telling about the descendants of the first son of Swayambhu Manu, Uttanpad. I shall now try to relate the activities of the descendants of Priyavrata, the second son of Swayambhu Manu. Please hear them attentively.
So the descendants of Priyavrata will be described directly by Sukadev Goswami to Maharaj Parikshit. So that will appear in the 5th canto. And in the 6th canto, we will see the description of the descendants of the Prachetas, or specifically Daksha, the activities of Daksha. Okay, moving on to verse 27. Yo naradat atma vidyama adhigamya punarmahim bhuktva vibhajaya putrebhya aishwaram samgadpadam.
Although Maharaj Priyavrata received instructions from the great sage Narada, he still engaged in ruling the earth. After fully enjoying material possessions, he divided his property among his sons. He then attained a position by which he could return home back to Godhead.
So this is a brief glimpse into what is going to be covered, intro. So as we had discussed, the Priyavrata was initially renounced, and Narad Muni was basically working on Priyavrata to completely take to the path of devotional service. And then at that point, Brahma comes to Priyavrata and says that because Uttanpad had, by the influence of Dhruva Maharaj, he had given up his rulership, emperorship, and went away. So then Brahma comes to Priyavrata, and Narad Muni also accepts both Narad Muni and Priyavrata accept the instructions of Brahma. So that will come up in the next canto. Here, a brief intro is given. Okay, moving on to verse 28. Imam tu kausharavinopavranitam Shaktanishmaya jitvat satkatham Pravratbhav shru kula kulo mune Dadadar murdhana charanam hridahare.
My dear King, in this way, after hearing the transcendental messages of the Supreme Personality of Godhead and his devotees from the great sage Maitreya, Vidura was overwhelmed with ecstasy. With tears in his eyes, he immediately fell down at the lotus feet of his Guru, his spiritual master. He then fixed the Supreme Personality of Godhead within the core of his heart.
So Prabhupada says that one cannot become a pure devotee of the Lord without having touched the lotus feet of a great devotee. One who has nothing to do with this material world is called Nishkinchana. The process of self-realization and the path home back to Godhead means surrendering to the bona fide spiritual master and taking the dust of his lotus feet on one's head. Thus one advances on the path of transcendental realization. Vidur had this relationship with Maitreya and he attained the results. Okay. Verse 29. Vidur vacha soyamadya mahayogin bhavata karunatmana drashitas tamasa paro yatra kinchan go hari.
Sri Vidura said, O great mystic, O greatest of all devotees, by your causeless mercy, I have been shown the path of liberation from this world of darkness. By following this path, a person liberated from the material world can return home back to Godhead.
So the teachings of Maitreya to Vidur are not just for Vidur. Right? 2 points are being made. One is that only by the causeless mercy of the spiritual master can one make spiritual advancement. The second that he makes is that, which now he is generalizing, that the path that you have said, a person liberated from, any person liberated from the material world can go back to Godhead. Right? So this is encouragement for those who are studying this conversation. One should not think that this is only meant for Vidur. This is meant for us also. Each of the lessons that are given, the instructions that have been imparted, they are as much applicable to us as they are to Vidur. And just like Vidur, he achieved perfection, the same perfection also is available to us. Verse 30. Sri Sukvacha iti anmaya tanna mantraya vidura gaja savayam swanam didruksha prayayau jnanitam nirvitrashayaha.
Shukdev Goswami continued, Vidura thus offered obeisances unto the great sage Maitreya, and taking his permission, started for the city of Hastinapura to see his own kinsmen, although he had no material desires.
So as I mentioned earlier that in the first canto 13th chapter, this visit of Vidur to Hastinapura is described. Sukdev Goswami also notes over here that he does not go back because of familial affections, but only because of spiritual benefit. So it's not that Vidur is thinking that Mahabharata is over now and things are peaceful in Hastinapur and my favorite nephews Pandavas are situated there. So I was asked to leave, or I was forced to leave because of Duryodhan. Duryodhan is dead now. So let me go back now and retire there peacefully. Right? So that's not his desire. Not for his material comforts, Not that he wanted to go back and catch up with the Pandavas, how are things, what's new. He did not even want to, because Vidur, throughout his life, he was deeply enmeshed into royal politics. Like we see how Vidur was constantly balancing between Dhritarashtra and the Pandavas, helping the Pandavas discreetly whenever he can, counseling Dhritarashtra. Like he was a consummate politician. But he does not even want to go back to resume his political position, which the Pandavas would have been more than happy to have. So, in fact, as when he preaches to Dhritarashtra, as soon as Dhritarashtra leaves, Vidur also leaves. And he does not stay one moment beyond that. And the only purpose there is to help Dhritarashtra. And as was noted earlier, not because of familial affection that he is my brother, but because Vidur felt compassionate on Dhritarashtra. That at this age also he was living with so much of material attractions, and he had committed so many activities because of which he would suffer. So Vidur wanted to give mutual emancipation. So Prabhupada says that when a saintly person wants to see his kinsmen, he has no material desire to see them. He simply wants to give them some instructions so that they can benefit. Vidur belonged to the royal family of the Kuveras, and although he knew that all the family members were destroyed at the Battle of Kurukshetra, he nonetheless wanted to see his elder brother Dhritarashtra, to see if he could deliver Dhritarashtra from the clutches of Maya. Okay. Next verse, last verse of the chapter and the canto. Etadya shrunayad rajan rajanam harya arpitatmana ayurdhanam yasya swasthi gatim aishwaryam apnuyat.
O King, those who hear these topics about kings who are completely surrendered to the Supreme Personality of Godhead obtain without difficulty a long life, wealth, good reputation, good fortune, and ultimately the opportunity to return home back to Godhead.
So this is the Falshruti that, and this is now pointing to not just the conversation between Narada and Prachetas, but it is pointing to also the conversation between Maitreya and Vidur, which had so many other conversations. And the Falshruti is that person will have long life, wealth, good reputation, good fortune. But ultimately, the real benefit is the person gets to go back to Godhead, which is where one can use all these other phalas of long life and wealth and good fortune, etc., can be used in the service of the Lord and the devotees, so that ultimately they get the opportunity to return back home, back to Godhead. Okay, so this is the end of the chapter, and I will quickly summarize the chapter. The chapter begins with the Prachetas ending their rule of the kingdom, million years by the calculation of the demigods, and they go to the forest to perform austerities. There they meet Narad Muni. Narad Muni then instructs them on devotional service. And so he first talks about how devotional service is the goal, then talks about the position of the Lord as worthy of all worship, and then the result of this bhakti is that it satisfies the Lord. And then the conclusion is the sweet exchange between Vidur and Maitreya, the gratitude that is expressed by Vidur to Maitreya, the potency of the conversation, and finally the Falshruti, which is that one also will develop bhakti and perfection. So that ends the fourth canto also. And we can stop now, and if there is any questions on what we discussed so far, we can take those questions. Also, we can discuss in terms of fifth canto. So let's first see if there's any question on what we had discussed so far.
Oh, Hare Krishna. So like, I mean, at least what I have experienced in my life personally is like whenever I receive some mercy, then I'm very enthusiastic for a certain period of time, and then gradually it just fades. So is that, I mean, how do I keep that consistent? Like, it doesn't remain for a long time. It's only for a short duration of time.
So it's called the halo effect. The halo effect is that as long as we are illuminated by the association of the devotee or the mercy, then we feel enlightened, and then it fades away. A practical way is to endeavor to constantly stay in the association of devotees, so that that enlightenment is persistent. And the second aspect is to consider the instructions to be the constant companion. So inevitably, our association at some point or the other will not be there, right? The circumstantially, that association will stop at some point of time. But then what will persist is the meditation on the instructions. So one practical way is, which I know devotees do, is that if they're associating with senior devotees, the Guru Maharaj, they make a habit of writing their realizations, and it's a way of capturing the Vani. That if they write the realizations that based on this instruction I was doing this, or based on this I was doing this, revisiting those realization, it's an echo effect. It gives vicariously that yes, I'm still associating with that particular devotees or those devotees. So one of the two ways, by staying constant association with devotees that inspire you, and by somehow else capturing the instructions and revisiting them, one can stay inspired. From a practical perspective, I can relate to what you're saying. We have that experience ourselves, that when Guru Maharaj is visiting us, our chanting is much better, our sadhana is much better. We get up early in the morning, before Mangal Arati time. When he leaves, it stays like that for some time, but then not so. But what I've experienced is that there is always some residual effect that is left. It does not go away completely. So maybe it's not at the same level, but there is some realizations that stay with you. There is some residual tenacity to following that more strict or more joyous path of devotion that stays with you. And then the more opportunities that you get to take this association, the residual effect will tend to build up.
Thank you, bro.
Thank you. Nice practical question.
Hare Krishna Prabhu. In the Philosophy, it said that the opportunity to return back home for those who have listen and read all that. But listening and reading, or like we had just did, is it? I think it's to digest the knowledge, to digest and realize that, like you just said, that will bring the effect. It's not like just, some people, okay, we are doing like a study group, but some people will just read it like a, just reading. What is your thought on that?
So Yes, Prabhu, I agree with the point you're making, that hearing it will start the process, but ultimately acting on what you hear is what will make the actual difference. But unless you hear, you can't act upon it. So that's why it's considered to be the same. That hearing will lead to acting upon it will lead to the perfection. So if one simply hears without any desire to pursue upon it, there will still be some change of heart, but obviously the perfection will not be delivered. Like if you take our own example, right? We have not even heard it, we have studied it. But does it mean that we will suddenly become pure devotees? No. But it definitely means that we are on that path to do it. You know, over and over the instructions that we have seen, the mercy of the Lord, and how it has changed the heart and the mind. All that makes an effect on our own heart and mind. It's subtle, we may not fully discern it, but it changes there. Next time when we study it, we'll get some more realizations. And realization means that you put knowledge into action. Like that's what will ultimately happen. So the Falstuti is for the sake of simplicity, is simply talking about the beginning point and the end point, that you hear it and you will get perfection. And there is a path that comes in between the two, that each devotee has their own roadmap to follow. So yes, I'm giving a long answer, agreeing with what you're saying.
Yeah, just like the example you gave, like, I would have never made that and connect the dot, as we said. The whole conversation between Vidura and Maitreya that pushed him to go back to Hastinapur. And most probably, for somebody else will say that, oh, I won't go there. They had disrespected me. What is the use for me to go there? But now we see how compassionate he is to go there and take him out. But just reading through it, I would have never connected this dot if you had not said it.
I agree with you. And that's where the mercy of Prabhupada purport comes in, that he helps us make these connections. And it's one deeper level of realization that we get. I'm sure there are many more deeper levels that we haven't reached, but at least that path is there towards deepening realizations.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. Regarding this Falastuti, I'm reading between lines, which says it is by hearing this one get without difficulty a long life, wealth, good reputation, good fortune, and ultimately the opportunity to return home back to Godhead. So, which means it's a long way to go home back to Godhead. So that's why I'm thinking it's not the short way. So anyway, I don't know, what's your thoughts on that?
That's one way of looking at it. And yes, I think in some context that point is made. Generally, my experience has been that when pure devotional service is being glorified, then the focus is not so much that it's a long way back, right? The focus is more so that it is the short way back, the instant way back. My sense is that ultimately is that, because if you remember, this is a Falstuti that is meant to attract everybody. So for those who want to enjoy material attachments, it will give them that also. And once the person has enjoyed material enjoyments, the person gets the opportunity. Dhruva Maharaj ruled for 36,000 years. And, the Prachetas ruled for more than 1 million years. So while they were ruling, they were still enjoying, while they were enjoying material opulences, they were still executing devotional service. So for pure devotees, it's non-different. But for those who still have material aspirations, the Falstuti is also attracting them. That you can get all this, and you can get this also. That's my understanding. I haven't. Prabhupada doesn't give a purport on this. Vishnu Chakravarti doesn't give a purport on this.
It looks like this is the reason why I asked that was, when we get all these things, long life, wealth, good reputation, and good fortune, quite often we forget our ultimate goal. And we end up in going in circles, cycle of all these things, dharma, artha, kama, moksha. But I think the only key understanding here is a surrender, complete surrender to Supreme Personality of Godhead. So that is the operative principle, I believe, which will help us not to go into that route. So there is always a what do you call a paranoia that by going into this route one might forget the ultimate goal. So that's why I was asking that question.
That is definitely, I mean, it's an interesting realization. There's definitely one way to look at the verse, that it will give you protection while you're enjoying all these material opulences. I was approaching it from that if this verse was to attract a materialist, then it's giving them all these advantages, right? And the person will say, okay, I'll get this, and ultimately I'll go there. But if a devotee is reading it, then the person will read it saying that even if I get long life and opulence and this, I will still go back to Godhead. Right. So yeah, thank you. So it basically covers both aspects of from the perspective of one who is scared of these things and one person who is seeking all these things.
Oh, Prabhu, using the long life, the wealth and everything, and the wealth especially, to preach more, to give other people Krishna consciousness. Like Prabhupada said, oh, why some people, they don't want money. Give me the money, I will build more temple, I will do this, I will do that.
So basically use your long life, wealth, and good reputation in the service of the Lord, right? Yeah. Good point, excellent point.
I've heard that, I think this was in some other context, how when devotees pray for, I'm not sure how to put this succinctly, but the Supreme Lord who's capable of giving us the ultimate gift of bhakti unto him, there is nothing that precludes him. So therefore, he can give us even those material benefits. So if there is something that he doesn't like, surrendering to the Supreme Lord, or in this case, developing bhakti, if there is something that is not available, then it means that it is, there is something lacking in him. So that's how I was reading it, that therefore perhaps this Phalastuti has everything that one would aspire for. Thereby saying that, there is nothing that is outside of his, ambit. I don't know if I made my point here, but.
That's a good point. Yeah, so the point that is being made is that all these opulences are also available to the spiritualist if they so desire to avail of them, because the Lord has all of them under his control. Right? That's what you're trying to say, Varshana, right?
I guess so. But also that, if there is something that, let's say one would approach Vishnu and Vishnu does not give, like in the case of Dhruva Maharaj, right? Like if there is something that, if he is unable to provide material benefits to his devotees, then that means he lacks that power. If one were to go to Vishnu and if Vishnu is only able to provide spiritual benefit, and not material benefit, then that also means that there's something lacking. Is that, I don't know if I again captured it, but perhaps you could modify it or edit it.
Makes sense to me. I think what you're saying is it indicates to the completeness of the Lord.
Yes.
He can
Right.
He's complete. He can give you anything and everything that you want.
Yoga Kshema Bhamiyam.
Yeah. Yeah, Falsutis are inspiring that way. Okay, so with that, we end the fourth canto. Do we want to start off with the fifth canto from next week? Or do you want to take a week to summarize? Do you want me to summarize the fourth canto for you? Do you want to summarize the fourth canto for the other devotees? What would you like to do?
So I can start. What it touched basically, there are certain swadhyaya as well. I don't know if everyone is on top of it, but at least from the minimal thing, the prayers which we learned, right? Like Prachetas, Shiva, the Dhruva prayers in this canto. So if they can do it periodically, that's what my opinion is, because in our last attempt, it was good that most of our devotees did provide their mock. But as the continuation, it may again break. Already, this was my fault, or maybe most of the devotees were off last couple of months. So we can continue with fifth canto, but also at the same point, not continuously, at least once a month kind of a thing, at least 2 to 3 devotees to continue with this mock, where we can agree upon whether it is prayers or swadhyaya. I'll send it across. So that's my point.
Okay, so you're saying is that we basically run 2 tracks. One is I start with the fifth canto and the verse by verse from next week onwards. And the other track is that the devotees amongst themselves, they take either the prayers or somehow we divide the fourth canto.
Yeah.
And they do, you're saying, a monthly presentation.
Yep.
On that. So would that be on one of the scheduled days, or would that be separate from the scheduled days?
Most of it, what I've noticed is this time, and especially even for me or anyone, the regular times were not working. They were opting out for early mornings on Saturdays, Sundays, right? So it is definitely different times. That's what I've noticed. So we can pick those times and we can, and this can continue because this will not have the continuation issues. So that we can continue what we're doing with the fifth canto.
Okay, thank you, Prabhu. Any other thoughts?
I guess for me, I've blocked out this time, Mondays and Wednesdays, and other times, I don't know if it'll match for me, Prabhu. There's always something or the other happening, but I know that these 3 hours this week, per week is set aside for this.
So that's in terms of the timing, Varshana. What about the format? So what Prem Kishore is saying is that I continue on the fifth canto, and then the devotees basically do a recap on the fourth canto.
I personally, I benefited a lot when we did it last time, when I took a small section, read through it, and I think it's beneficial. I would definitely like to do it. But again, I'm okay with whatever the group decides.
Okay, that helps.
I guess some of us might be willing to do the same time as the class, and some of us might have time during the weekends. So some flexibility in that schedule would be helpful. And certainly I agree with Prem Kishore Prabhu that we continue with the fifth canto and intersperse with the mock session. Or run parallelly on weekends, however it is, works out. But while the canto is going on, we can do this. That's a good idea. Very good idea.
Thank you, Prabhu. Saran Prabhu, what do you think?
Yeah, actually, I am not participating in the Swadhyay, and that's why I stay be quiet, and whatever format you feel like good is good.
Okay, thank you, Prabhu. Paramatma Prabhu, thoughts from your end?
I think Paramatma Prabhu is not there. He left. Oh, he's there?
Okay.
Maybe.
Achyuta?
Yeah, I think that should work for me as well. Like, I mean, I know I wasn't able to do the Swadhyaya last time, but now I'm back in the country, so I'll be able to participate in the Swadhyaya.
Okay. I see Paramatma Prabhu is back. Paramatma Prabhu, were you part of the discussion? Did you hear the discussion going on?
Yes,
Can't hear you.
yeah, I was listening in to the discussion all the way through.
Thoughts from your end? So we were kind of debating in terms of, now we finished the fourth canto, beginning the fifth canto, and Prem Kishore Prabhu said that we can, I can start with the fifth canto and we can run a parallel track in which the devotees will do presentations on the main points in the fourth canto, maybe the prayers or maybe chronological chapter wise. And there's some discussion of whether it should be done on one of the scheduled slots on Monday, Wednesday, or should it be done on another slot. Varshana said that Monday, Wednesday works best for her. I think for other devotees, it's like up in the air, may or may not work. Just wanted to get your thoughts.
For me, whatever is decided by the group, I'll fit in, even if it has to be another night for the presentations or like that. I don't have a problem, except for Friday night. You know, I can join in any other night.
Okay. Thank you, Prabhu. Lalita Mataji, thoughts from you?
Hare Krishna Prabhu. Me too. Can be any day except Friday. Yeah. So yeah, works for me.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Varsundar Prabhu?
I think he will be commuting. He cannot talk.
He's commuting at this time. Okay. Okay, so what I'll do is that we will begin with the fifth canto from next week, and depending on whatever is agreed, that if it is on one of the scheduled spots, then I'll basically work around that, or if it's a non-scheduled spot, then I'll just do contiguous there. So Prem Kishore Prabhu, if you can work out and get a consensus on that. And I think from my end, I'm assuming that next Monday we'll start fifth canto, first chapter.
Yes, Prabhu. And also, if you feel we should summarize fourth canto before start of fifth canto.
Right. So that was my question. That would that be a part of Swadhyaya, or is there something that you would like me to do if you're studying? If
No,
you're
do you have any material for that summary, or this basically the Swadhyaya fourth canto? We will similar to prior Swadhyaya, like how we did. We will distribute among ourselves. But even before even kickstart of fifth canto, I was thinking like at least one session of as a summary, if you have any material with that way. Or...
I don't have any material. Nothing that I know of.
Okay, no problem. We can kickstart the 5th canto then, and we will distribute the 4th canto among us.
Okay. Okay, so we will end now. Thank you so much. 4th canto ki jai. Vanchakalpatarubhyascha vipasindubhyevacha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Anantkoti Vaishnavavrinda ki jai. Ya Prabhupada ki jai. Tagore Premanand. Hari Bol. In
Thank
terms
you.
of what is left, the 5th and the 6th canto combined are a little less than the 4th canto. So there are two. The 6th canto has 5th canto has 26 chapters. The 6th canto has 19 chapters, but the chapters are much smaller, especially 5th canto chapters. They're really, really small. There's one chapter I know that has only 6 verses. And so this just in terms of number of verses, the chapters are, the combined chapters are smaller than the 4th canto. In the 5th canto, we have the creation, the structure of the universe. And there we'll see what's the best way to present it. Either to present it separately, like we did the creation, we can do a separate presentation on the structure of the universe, or we can do it through the verse. But it's towards the later part of the 5th canto. We still have time for that. Okay, thank you. Hare Krishna.